Good morning.
Good morning.
How's everybody doing? We're here. All right, so I'm going to begin with a quote from Nathan W. Morris. Edit your life frequently and ruthlessly. It's your masterpiece after all. Today we're going to take a journey together. Our question of the day is, are you pot bound? And really the question of the day too was, am I pot bound? But before we dig into that, let's talk about the definition. So yeah, see what I did there? So that we're all on the same page. What does it mean to be pot bound? The term is used to describe a plant that has outgrown its container. Over time, the roots take over the pot and there's no room for soil or water. And I don't know if you've ever seen it, but if you take a plant out of the plastic that it comes in from a nursery, when you look at the roots, they're all wound around and around. If you leave it bound in the pot, the plant will either stop growing or eventually it will die. In the case of a plant, the solution is to either repot it, divide it up, or prune the roots. But for humans, what does it mean? What does it mean for us when we are pot bound? I believe that it's when you've outgrown the habit, the job, the relationship, the behavior pattern, the house, but you're still in it. It's that time before change, before release, before growth. And for some people, this is the place where they choose to remain. So I'm going to stop before we go on and put a little major honesty out on the table. I really struggled this week with it coming together, not because I don't know this topic. I wrote a perfectly fine talk. It had signs, it had symptoms, it had reasons, it had options, but what it did not have was me. And as the week progressed, I realized that I was in resistance to publicly talking about an example for me of pot bound, because what I wanted to do was use a past example, and that's not the way that spirit works. I get to use a current example, yay! So it kind of feels like my Brené Brown moment of vulnerability. Hopefully I won't cry. But you know, it could just be spirit moving me forward. That this is the time and the space for me to look at that particular thing. So at any rate, once I was able to really be honest and really understand where my resistance was coming from, it came together and there's a whole lot of pages. So hello, my name is Brittany and I am pot bound. So how did I know? And how can you tell? What are some of the signs and signals? So first off, I would encourage you to think about how you're feeling. And I don't mean on occasion, I mean what's your overall feeling in a particular area? Are you unsettled? Are you bored? Are you stagnant, cramped, unhappy, complacent, stuck? I mean, we could go on with a lot of other words. Feelings are like a nudge, or oftentimes a smack upside the head, that it's time to pay attention. And often they indicate that something needs to change, or that something needs to be different. And as we know, we live in a feeling universe. So the longer that we feel this way, the more we attract situations to keep us feeling this way. Who wants to feel that way? So for example, in my life, I tend to use my level of happiness as a gauge. I'm okay with feeling unhappy on occasion. But when I feel unhappy over a prolonged period of time, I know it's time. It's time to look. And honestly, we're meant to thrive. And I am meant to thrive. So if how I feel today is creating my tomorrow, I really want to pay attention to that. But in honesty, sometimes I'm not ready to address the unhappy or even admit that there's a place where there's unhappy. Which brings me to the next way to tell if you're pot bound. Notice what you're doing or what you're not doing. So your actions. Are you complaining? Are you in reaction mode? Are you numb? Are you procrastinating or avoiding something or someone? Are you looking outside of yourself instead of taking the time to figure out what you need? Are you showing up in the world with low energy instead of dedicating your time for self-care? In my case, my behaviors were pretty telling. For those that don't know, I am a full-time caretaker, and so I was using my caretaking as an excuse not to connect, not to show up, and not to be out in the world. on a regular basis. And the truth is, I have a really great support system. I am not isolated. I can be out in the world when I choose to be, but I was not choosing to be. And I sat for a time in isolation, feeling a combination of stagnant and kind of agitated. Is there a place within you that reacted at all or that felt in your belly an answer to any of those questions? Is there an area in your life that maybe needs a little pruning? Now that we've talked about what it looks and feels like, let's look at why some people choose to remain in that state. What keeps us pot-bound? The first one is status quo. So I appreciate a bit of structure at times. It's comforting to know that a specific thing is going to happen in a specific way. Like, I'm going to bake a turkey at Thanksgiving, and I'm going to make sugar cookies at Christmas with my nieces. But it's really easy to fall into a pattern of what's comfortable and familiar. Why do it differently? Why break a pattern? Why change the way that you've always done it? Consider this quote from Aaron W. Matthews. "We've always done it that way is invalid when that way hasn't led to more life, greater growth, or maximum efficiency. Complacency is too easy to breed and already has one foot in the grave." I remember one time in a Science of Mind class, I was really, really frustrated. And so I proclaimed, I want change, but not if I have to change. I really did say that in class. And the truth is, I often feel resistant to change because if I don't change, I know what to expect. And I like to know what to expect. But if I don't want to feel or pay attention, I can go into autopilot and robot my way through the day. You know, the day unfolds in the same way. You get up, you drink coffee, you eat breakfast, you get dressed. But over time, it totally was stealing my joy. I was not expressing the divinity in me. And being an autopilot not only stifles my creativity, which is really important to me, but it also stifles my connection to spirit. I can't hear or feel God if I'm not listening or if I'm numb. Is there a place in your life where you're in autopilot or where you're feeling numb? The second thing that can keep us pot-bound is confusion. The belief that you don't know what to do or which choice is the right one to make. And it can really become a crutch to avoid or delay making a decision. Ernest Holmes had this to say in his book, This Thing Called You. "No matter what confusion appears at the surface of your life, there's always a place of calm at the center of your being." He goes on to say that confusion comes from a sense of separation because you're looking only at the surface. It exists as a condition, but not as a reality. If confusion comes, take your intellect and dive deep into your pool of peace. Through an act of faith, open your eyes, and you will see there is no confusion. The next one is resistance. Resistance is defined as the refusal to accept or comply with something, the attempt to prevent something by action or argument. It's a lot like swimming upstream. As much as we say we want to take the path of least resistance, how often do we resist change when it's right in front of us knocking at the door? Robert Conklin said this, "Resistance is thought transformed into feeling. Change the thought that creates the resistance and there is no more resistance." So for me, resistance was hanging out in the isolation. If I go out in the world right now at this time, how will that look? Am I even prepared to be out in the world? I think the magnitude of caretaking made me feel both depleted and even more isolated. And eventually I got to the point where that's not acceptable. And I was ready to take action. So before I talk about action, let's talk about one more reason why sometimes people choose to stay pot-bound, and that's fear. The definition of fear is an unpleasant emotion caused by the threat of danger, pain, or harm. In his radio address, How to Conquer Fear, Ernest Holmes said this, "Fear not only takes the joy out of living, it reduces those who are dominated by it to a state that makes everything we do ineffective." He goes on to say that fear is often based in our insecurities, such as feeling unwanted, unworthy, or unsafe. In his book, Living Without Fear, Ernest Holmes said this, "We spend most of our lives trying to avoid that which we do not like, and seeking to experience more of those things that bring us pleasure, happiness, and well-being. However, in doing this, we find ourselves in an almost continuous state of fear in one or more of its many forms. We fear what we don't like, and we fear that we will not have what we do like. Worry, crisis, and anxiety seem to plague most people, often to the extent that life is something to be suffered through rather than to be lived with joy. No one imposes fear upon us, rather we create it for ourselves in our own thoughts and emotions. And what we need to realize is we have just as much freedom to eliminate fear as we have in creating it. Fear is the absence of faith, and perfect love casts out fear. I could do probably an entire year of talks about the things that I used to be afraid of. Fear dominated my life for many years. Fear of failure, fear of success, fear of acceptance, fear of rejection, fear of speaking my truth, fear of being too much for people, fear of not being enough, and it goes on. But in my example of being pot-bound, fear was keeping me from moving forward. What if this is too much for me to handle? What if I can't do this? What if my gifts are not needed? What if no one likes me? Blah, blah, blah. I've had 7 years in Science of Mind. It's not like I don't know better. And there it is, the truth, right there, popping up. All of my fear was internal. It was me reacting to me. And honestly, sometimes I get tired of me. But that's a whole other thing. It had no basis in truth. I am loved, and lovable, period. I just forgot it for a time. All right, so before we move into what moves us forward, we're going to do a really short meditation. I promise it will be short. So I invite you to get comfortable in your chair, to uncross your hands, your legs, to close your eyes or cast them downward. Feel the chair supporting you. Take a moment to breathe fully. Let your chest expand as you inhale. Picture yourself in a quiet, peaceful place. Perhaps the beach or a forest. Know that this is a sacred space, and wherever you are is perfect. Breathe. Think about your life in this moment. Is there anything that you've outgrown? Is there a situation, a relationship, a habit that no longer serves you? Does someone or something feel like a constant struggle? Are you feeling unsettled? Take a moment in the question. And when you're ready, I invite you to come back from this quiet, peaceful place, knowing that you can return at any time. Are we back? All right. So, what moves us forward, either into a new, larger container, or how do we become unbound? The first thing is choice. I believe that we're here to learn and grow, to expand. So when you're feeling stuck, agitated, unsettled, any of the other feelings that we talked about, I invite you to stop and to ask yourself, do I want to continue to feel this way, or do I want to feel differently? And once you're clear that you want to feel differently, you can take action. The next thing that moves us forward is spiritual practice, such as prayer, affirmation, meditation, visioning, journaling, seeking wise counsel. These are the ways that we connect to God. And these are the tools that refine us along the way. All of the wisdom of the ages is available, and all that's required is to be still and listen. In my case, I used journaling and affirmative prayer to get to a place of understanding and release. So I made the choice to release the fear, the resistance, and my attachment to status quo, and I chose to replace it with the truth. I am inspired, created, supported, and connected. I released the thought that I could have handled it differently, knowing that I was meant to have this exact experience. And I forgave myself for not doing better and committed myself to doing better now that I'm aware. And the next thing that moves us forward is faith. And I would add excitement to that as well. So what if the next time you felt fear, you were to shift that thought to the excitement that you feel right before you do something really awesome, like riding a roller coaster or snorkeling or going on bumper cars. It's sort of a delicious anticipation instead of dread. How much more productive would that be? I love this quote by Jean Shinoda Bolen. When you recover or discover something that nourishes your soul and brings joy, care enough about yourself to make room for it in your life. And I did that with today's talk. There was a time that I was nervous, and I decided that I was going to be uber excited about it. This is not something that I have to do. It's something that I'm called to do. You feel the difference? Mm-hmm. And I have faith. I know that each word is divinely inspired, and I'm stepping into a deeper version of myself. Do I feel 100% ready? No. I'm not sure anybody ever feels 100% ready, but I'm in. And once Spirit receives my sacred yes, the entire universe conspires for my good. So lastly, I want to talk about reframing as a way to move forward. Sometimes it's not possible to move to a larger container. Sometimes the right and perfect response is to change the way you feel about what's happening. For example, I'm caretaking for someone who has both mental and physical experiences. And part of the solution to me being pot bound was to reframe the entire situation. I'm not called to move. I'm called to be a caretaker. However, I was feeling depleted and isolated. So my choice and action is to surrender my desire for change in the people around me, because I'm the only one that I can change. It's okay for each person around me to have their own experience. I'm not in control of them. Even as a caretaker, I'm not in control of another person's experience. It's theirs to have. I can let it be. I can choose not to react. I can allow. And at this time, it's a daily and sometimes hourly choice to surrender until it becomes a habit, until it becomes my new norm. In the meantime, I'm saying yes more often to things outside of my home with people I adore. I am not isolated, and I am no longer pot bound. So I'm going to close with this quote by Hiro Boga. I'm astonished and saddened by how little we are willing to settle for. We are fractals of the sacred, yet we settle for a living instead of a life, fitting in as a substitute for belonging. Approval, fame, stardom, these are pale reflections of our radiance, our deep longing to offer our soul's creative presence to the world and to be received with joyful celebration. If you were to lose everything that you've settled for, all the roles, identities, possessions, relationships, functions that define you, you would still be unmistakably, irreplaceably you, the sacred incarnate. Can you really be satisfied with less? Thank you.